Welcome back, everybody, to Quid Prog Quo, the musical podcast where I introduce my friends and loved ones to progressive rock music, and they in turn get me to listen to whatever they want. And this time, I've got a really good friend of mine, Ian, is coming on, and we're talking about two bands that are very kind of different in terms of approach, but very similar in terms of expression. Really excited for you guys to check this one out. We had a blast talking about how both these bands were a little bit on the different side, but also how they overlap. And I'm going to let the episode talk about it itself. As always, I want to extend a huge thank you to Olena Alinsky for designing the show's graphic, as well as Explosive Ear Candy for their track All Together Now, which is the soundtrack to this podcast. So without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. And we can basically get started whenever we're both ready to go.
Sure. I'm ready, Raren. I've been kind of caught between three albums, so I'll figure it out which one I want to go.
That's always how it goes. It's always just like what is it? The panic choice is the one that we have to go for.
I guess so. I'm confident on the three that I have at the moment, but
okay.
Yeah, whenever you are.
It'll be a panic order.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome in, and thank you so much for coming on board today. I'm super excited to have you on. Do you want to introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and how we know each other?
Sure, absolutely. As Michael said, I am Ian. I've known Michael for not too long, but about maybe almost like exactly a year at this point, because it was around April.
So. Yeah.
Last April, I ended up joining a D&D show that Michael was a part of at the time when, all schedules lined up nicely. And we ended up doing that for quite a while together. I think it was up until 2021 pretty much started.
Yeah.
But we've been playing D&D for a while, and since then have been just mutuals on our social medias, and it's been a nice little time since then. But I personally play a lot of D&D. I listen to a handful of different things music-wise, whether it's like experimental indie, some strange harsh noise stuff. Me some of my my personal tinge. Every time I hear Michael bring up Between the Buried and Me, my heart always flutters. And yeah, that's pretty straightforward what I do. Nothing too crazy outside of that.
No, that's great. I'm super excited to have you on because I know that you like similar music that I do, and we have bonded over that. I mean, most of our talks are about D&D and tabletop role-playing games and our mutual love for Genesis and all that. So such a good system. It was a fun time for me to kind of think about which album I wanted to introduce you to, because for the most part, I've shied away from metal for a lot of my friends, mainly just because it is a harsher genre of music to get into when the starting point is so far removed. But when I know that Between the Buried and Me and a lot of those other great tracks, I'm more excited to give you something a little different, something a little that'll whet your appetite a little bit more.
Sure.
So do you want to talk about let me ask, have you narrowed down the album, or should I talk about the one that I've picked?
I have a good idea, and I might try to keep it in a similar sect if it has any sort of relation. I don't think it will if you're going on the heavier route, but you know what? No, I'll stick to it. Before I even dive in on this, I want to guarantee that we have maybe a new experience with this. Have you listened to Disasterpeace, any of his music at all?
I have not. This is a new one for me.
Disasterpeace is a just a single person. He does all of his music, mostly like chiptunes type stuff. It's all very score like. It almost sounds like it would be like the soundtrack to a game. In fact, he did the soundtrack for the movie It Follows, and that's an incredible soundtrack on its own. But the specific album I like to get everyone to listen to has to be in full stereo. Just immerse yourself. It is The Rise of the Obsidian Interstellar. It is a beautiful journey front to back, and I think you'll enjoy it pretty heavily.
I'm going to try to The Rise of
the Obsidian Interstellar.
Okay, of the Obsidian.
Like
I'll start typing it. I'm really hoping that it'll autocorrect eventually. Interstellar. And that was by The Disaster?
by Disasterpeace. Like
Disasterpeace, like masterpiece, but with Disasterpeace.
yes. And peace is spelled like peace on earth peace. It's a little goofy, but
Ah,
yes.
see, that's got some layers to it because
Yeah.
not only is it a play on the masterpiece, but it's also like peace on earth. Okay,
Hmm.
because as I was writing it out, I'm like the disaster artist. No, that's a movie and a book. So
Hmm.
okay, I'm pretty excited. Now I've kind of whittled it down to two artists for you as well. And I want you to be the chooser of this, to kind of pick your poison, if you will.
Hmm.
I have one band that's more of a symphonic dark metal from Norway, and then I have a crazy sound metal that's just crazy insane that's a little bit more popular, and I'm afraid that you may have already heard it, so that's why I'm kind of leaning between the two.
I would. I first do want to see what the crazy, like popular kind of experimental crazy metal is. I want to know what this is
Okay.
before I jump into the darker metal stuff
the
because
one that
that's
the one that I was thinking of was Daughters. Have you heard of Daughters?
I do know of Daughters.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the artists that was originally not Daughters specifically, but
Right.
there's an artist I was going to potentially recommend called The Locust, which I think you
Mm-hmm.
may have heard of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, they have a lot of influence off of what Daughters ended up doing,
Okay.
especially with their newest album. But The
Right.
Locust is wacky, to
Okay,
say the
and
least.
in that sense, because you are familiar with Daughters, have you heard of the band called Leprous?
I only know the name, don't know the
Okay,
music.
perfect. We're gonna go to for Leprous then.
Cool.
Leprous, I find, is like a gothic dark metal from
Mhm.
Norway, and they've been pretty high in the prog sphere in the past couple of years.
Okay.
They've put out, like, I think right now they're up to 7 albums, and they got really really big in like the early 2000s, or sorry, 2010s. What am I
Mhm.
saying? And the album that I want you to listen to is their 2015 album, their fifth album, of The Congregation, because that was the one that got me into them, and that was the one that just kind of blew my mind of like what they were doing. um,
Cool.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I see that.
love, I really, I their whole set, like they don't have a bad album. But I do find the albums that they released after The Congregation is a lot more atmospheric and a lot more mellow, and the
Mhm.
albums that they released previous to The Congregation is a lot heavier and a lot more intense. So I feel like this album is a good balance between those two.
All right. That is beautiful sounding, honestly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have it pulled up on my screen right now, ready to go for. So that's good to know.
Yeah,
Um, with with you going kind of in depth on Leprous and their catalog there specifically, I do want to
yeah.
touch upon a few things with Disasterpeace as well.
Let me know
Um,
about them. Yeah.
yes. So with Disasterpeace, I really like a lot of the earlier stuff because it's a lot more straight up like chip tunes, not like many effects thrown on there. It almost sounds like it was made in like the program Famitracker, where you can make Famicom
Yeah, yeah,
uh
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, just make Famicom tracks like that. But with the rise of the Obsidian Interstellar, it really gets more. It fits the theme of a sci-fi adventure. It
Mm.
is such a vast change, even if it's not really too much of an electronic shift from what's being produced. Um, like his earlier stuff through, I think it is Neutralite, which sounds like it's a goofy adventure that you'd play on the NES, or maybe an NES themed
Yeah.
movie with an NES sound chip soundtrack to it. It really jumps into a its own identity
Mm-hmm.
with
Mm-hmm.
that specific release. And then from there, it's just been a lot of different, maybe indie game soundtracks, as well as I think he did Hyper Light Drifter as well, if you're familiar with the
Ooh.
game itself.
Only
Um,
by name, but yeah.
yeah, it's
Th-
that actually is a very good soundtrack. Kind of fits the same bill, but
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Now, is this track, "The Rise of Obsidian Interstellar," is it a concept album? Because I've got it pulled up on my phone here, and it starts off with a prologue. And whenever an album starts off with either prologue or overture or something like that, I get very excited.
it's In a sense, yes, it definitely goes through different moods seamlessly because it is one of those front to back listens, no like shuffle type albums.
Mhm.
But it is all chip tunes. It is all like there's no vocals or anything. It is just a simply electronically instrumental experience.
Okay.
And like I said, it's like it goes through the ringer with the emotions it made me feel, at least, but hopefully it'll make you feel the same.
Yeah, I hope so too. Okay. And I've got a really good pair of headphones to really help dive me into this. So
Good.
I'm pretty excited about this. So I'll go listen to Disasterpeace. You have a listen for Leprous, and we'll reconvene back here once both of us have finished our musical odyssey journeys.
Sure. I'm also going to send you a track, if you're listening to it on Spotify specifically, or
Yeah.
like that. I'll send you a track on YouTube. That's the final track of it. It is a hidden track that was on, I think, there's some original CD releases as well as the vinyl release.
Oh.
So I will send that over to you so you have that last track
Yeah,
in the
because I think
experience.
you've got about 20 minutes on me in terms of album length. Like
Yes.
Congregation, I think is just over an hour, whereas this one looks like it's about 45-ish minutes.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
that will work out. I've got a little bit of extra homework, but I love it.
Cool. So I will get that last song over to you, and then I'll jump right into your Leprous album here.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, we'll see you back here in just over an hour then.
Absolutely.
And with that, Ian and I go into our own separate musical silos to experience one another's music. I get to listen to Disasterpeace, and Ian gets to listen to, oh no, the name just escapes me. Leprous. That's the one. We had a blast, as I mentioned, talking about both of these artists and really carrying on about them. It was a great time. And just doing my usual shout out for my Patreon. If you want to help support the show, if you want to help support me and all what that I do in terms of my creative endeavors, head on over to Patreon/Notes Reviews. That's Patreon/Notes Reviews. And even $1 a month really does go a long way in terms of helping me kind of finance these shows and helps put some food on my table, as some of these amazing folks have done. And I want to extend a huge shout out to, let's see here. I'm going to go to Mark Man40. Mark Man40 is a huge mover and shaker in terms of the progressive rock community. He holds live shows. He helps finance artists. I think he's a really good influence in the progressive rock community, and he also helped me out. So I want to extend a huge thank you to Mark for doing that, as well as my most recent subscriber of Mark R. So 2 marks for the price of 1. Thank you both so much. And if you want to be cool like Mark Man40 as well as Mark R, you can head on over to wow, I'm just doing a great job at this ad read. Patreon/Notes Reviews. And if you want to check out more things that I'm doing, you can head on over to Notes Reviews. That's where I upload all of my usual progressive rock music reviews, as well as my tabletop role-playing game. That's Notes on TTRPG. I uploaded a couple weeks ago a pretty big review of the Paranoia system that I really enjoyed, and I'm hoping to dive pretty deep into the Edge of the Empire game system as well. Yeah, you can also check out this video on YouTube if you're watching it on YouTube. Hello. But if you're listening to it wherever you get your podcasts, you can also check it out on YouTube, and kind of vice versa as well. So that's enough about me yammering on. Let's dive back into this week's episode, find out what Ian thought of the Congregation from Leprous, and what I thought of the rise of the Idicidian Interstellar, I think it was, by the Disasterpeace. Spoiler alert, I really liked it. Let's dive back into the episode. Can you speak? You're a little on the quiet side.
Ooh. That's why.
There we go.
Turned down my mic so I wouldn't hear it when listening.
Oh, so what did you think?
Oh, what a ride. I can see why the opening track has 6 million plays on Spotify specifically, but wow. Wow.
Yeah. Bring me through some of the thought process
All right,
here.
let me get my note cards out that I had written down here.
Oh, good.
Off the bat, the first thing, like one of the first things I was like, wow, this is like if someone told Alter Bridge that they could be better. Um, and I grew up loving Alter Bridge. Like that was one of the heavier bands I listened to when I was in like early high school, very early high school, maybe like 2009. Um,
Mhm.
but I'm so glad that I decided to pick Rise of the Obsidian Interstellar to go along with this, considering that there is
Yeah,
so many heavy synth themes in the congregation specifically
yeah,
that that caught me so quickly, and I loved that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, I know I'm going to be talking about the rise of the Obsidian in a little bit, but
yep,
I felt the same thing as I was listening to it. I'm like, I am so glad that I went with Leprous for this because
yep,
the amount of overlap and the amount of like synergy that's going on between these two is
yeah,
just incredible.
hugely,
Yeah.
hugely. Um, with like I was saying with the first track specifically, the price.
Hmm.
Uh, I okay, so I specifically said that the spacing that they used in the opening riff, like bam, 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 was
Yeah.
artful. I am a big fan of when bands will use that like empty space between guitar riffs or between bass lines,
Hmm.
just to use as its own instrument, own type of instrumentation and orchestration of it. But
Yeah.
oh, and it reprised the verse in that beginning with the synth following the first like.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's I love their ability to like create these really interesting time signatures
Yes.
within that, leaving a space, but then almost playing catch up with the space that they've left to create this loop
Mm-hmm.
that they then are somehow able to play on top of. So yeah.
Using those strange time signatures to make the chorus is such a bigger hook too, because it's of
Hmm.
course having a more followable in quotes chorus is always going to be nice to have,
Yeah.
but it stands out so much more when it's like, oh, I can't bob my head to, I
There
caught
we
it,
go.
here we
Yeah.
go, and
Yeah.
nailed it.
I always picture it as being like a tension and release. It's like you're tightening the gears, you're tightening up the coil in order for it to be released upon
Mhm.
the actual course.
Oh yeah,
So
I
yeah.
feel that. I
Yeah.
feel that big
I
time.
particularly like that. Yeah. Um yeah. So you talked about the price. Was there any other tracks for you on this album that stood out?
Most of them.
Well, that's good.
So I was gonna say, I don't know where I was gonna say it, but I guess here's a really good time. Like within the first three tracks, on
Yeah.
Rewind specifically, I was like, all right, I'm gonna
Mm.
save this to my library. I know that you usually will ask if you're gonna revisit,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
immediately I just want to say it's a yes. um,
Amazing. Okay. Okay.
I realized that when listening through it, that Triumphant Track 6 was a like almost a place to catch your breath and almost even to catch
Hmm.
you off guard once it comes back in with track 6
Yeah.
within my fence. And it's like the first four tracks broken up into that small section of the story. Triumphant hits, and it's like, oh, there's a shift. Then
Hmm.
the next two tracks within my fence in red. Red is, I think, one of my favorite tracks on the album, specifically
Hmm.
track 7. Especially because when it first started, I was like, that like kind of like crunchy synthy sound that was in there. I
Yeah.
was like, this is actually a sound you could hear on Rise of the Obsidian Interstellar. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
in Beta's brilliance. Yeah.
They're using a lot of those like really interesting sounds. They're not just limiting themselves to any of those like preset Yamaha
Yeah.
sounds or anything like that. Like they're really playing with the different sounds of like mellotrons and synths and like even like a Moog at sometimes.
I was gonna say that deep Moog bass that
Yeah.
it rounds out so much. I think I said
Mhm.
specifically in let's see, in track 10 down,
Yeah.
there's a point where there was just so much low end. I was
Mhm.
very glad pretty early on that the mixer I'm using for audio, everything coming out too, I can make it so the playback also has the higher gain and higher bass than the regular mixes. So I was like, I'm gonna
Mhm.
turn that up. It seems like it's gonna do it justice, and boy, did my ears be like, good.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, I know for me, you had already touched upon Rewind, and yeah, I agree that like the first four tracks for me are like the standout. Like these are the ones that hook me right from the beginning. The Price, Third Law, Rewind, and then like the Flood for me is my
Flood.
favorite track
The
off
flood.
of this album. They're what they're able to do with just two notes throughout most of this.
Oh, that drony or that.
That's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Ba-da,
that was a
ba-da,
highlight.
ba-da, ba-da. And that's
Yeah.
essentially that's the song. Like the song is just those two notes until you get to the final breakdown at the end where again it's that tightening of the coil. It's that tension that's building throughout the entirety of the track that is
Mhm.
finally able to release when he gets that giant play out at the end.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, I knew that these guys would be like something extremely special and something that I, from there, went back and listened to all their other albums. Um, and it's interesting because those four tracks for me are so ridiculously good. I honestly forget how good the rest of the album is.
Yeah.
You
It's
know?
I with me saying like how there's points where it's like they separate everything that is the album. The
Mm-hmm,
first four are such a force, then it falls up like with Triumph and with My
mm-hmm,
Fence in Red. But
mm-hmm,
the last two tracks specifically, I don't want to ignore like track 9 Moon, but
mm-hmm.
Down and Lower, I feel like summarize the whole album up so well while also putting a nice tidy bow on it. Like
Yeah,
it gets a
yeah.
lot of the same, not necessarily themes and maybe the story, because it's kind of hard to follow the lyrics specifically when you're trying to listen to the whole thing. But
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
there's a lot of spaces where it gets that like nice technical, almost like human abstract-y type, like you get in the beginning of The Price, and
mm-hmm.
a lot of those bigger, slower, more bassy choruses that happen. I think also in Slave, which is another popular one.
Yep,
but
yep, yep.
but yeah, no, that it wrapped up so nicely, and it plays into so much of what the foundation of the start of the album really felt.
Mm-hmm.
And I yeah.
Yeah, and I'm definitely in agreement to you. Like as again, as much as I love and I go back to those first four tracks, when I go to listen and sit down to the entire album, I keep forgetting like how good like Red, Slave, and Moon are because
Yeah.
they are kind of in the middle of the album. Because like you, I also love Down and Lower, like the last two
Yeah.
tracks, where I'm like, okay, I've got these shining beacons at the end of this album to look forward to. That those mid tracks I keep forgetting how good they are
Yeah.
because I don't listen to them as often, but it's a shame because they really are highlights on the album, which is
Truly.
crazy to think about like how many good tracks are on this. So,
Yeah, it's very surprising because it's like, that it's like there's obviously going to be the hits on an album, like not even necessarily like this, but just in general.
mhm,
But for an album to have such good like support and framework around those big, it's like swells in the song but swells in the album too. It's so well paced, and it's so fluid to listen to front to back. And I think this is
mhm,
specifically, I think it was at Red that I was like, this is going to be an album if I listen to it like more often than however often I listen to my music, which is getting less and less. But that's a secret I don't like to tell people.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um it's a front to back listen, I think, for me. A
mhm,
definite like let it play out, give myself an hour, and I'll experience it again.
yeah.
um and yeah, no, it's thank you for showing
Yeah.
it.
Oh, no problem. And if you like those like really bassy bottom type of
Yes.
tracks, I would also recommend checking out Melinda, the album that comes out after this one.
Oh,
It's a little bit less heavy. It's a little bit more atmospheric, but there's so many items on it. There's one track that I'm trying to remember what it's called. I want to say it is either Coma or Mirage, where there's this really like granular bass that's just like it has this moment that sounds like brr, brr, brr.
revving.
It's yeah, it sounds like it's a
That's
revving
sick.
engine. It's crazy. But it's a little bit more atmospheric and it's a lot less heavy.
Right.
But I think it might be right up your alley if you want more of this. Otherwise, just check out Cole or Bilateral. They're other two really, really good tracks or
Mhm.
albums.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna do a discography listen through because that pulled me in real heavy, and I'm very glad. I've been trying to pull apart a lot of band's use of effects through instruments, and
Mm-hmm.
like of course there's like the classic like metal fuzz and distortion thrown in there, but I think specifically with the bass, while we're talking about bass and synth, I think that their bassist uses a really good bass synth pedal that really
Mm-hmm.
turns the tone of the bass. Because I think um I had it pulled up specifically in track 3, my brain is farting. No, I'm sorry, in the flood.
Mm-hmm.
That repeating droney, or is that rewind? I think I had the droney repeating.
I mean, they both kind of do.
Yes, they do both.
Yeah, the thing
Um,
that while we're still talking about it and while you're kind of thinking about it, the one thing that I love about both the flood as well as rewind is they take that musical almost interlude or that musical play out, and where most bands would kind of stop once the idea was put down, they kind of continue on and blossom it out and like really push the boundaries of what it's doing at that point. And
mhm.
that's one of the things that I love about this band is that they'll put down an idea, and instead of just like leaving it there and being like, okay, now we're done with it, they'll actually like expand upon it even further, especially on um rewind
Yeah.
when we get to that big play out at the end. And yeah, every time I listen to it, it just moves me how intense it gets by the end of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I hugely agree. Um, Specifically with the flood,
Mhm.
because I think like you're saying, like how instead of just jumping off of the idea, it blossoms it with the that that like drony synth sound that is so ever present in the flood. That the bass, when it takes over, when it becomes more apparent that it's still in the background, you can
Mhm.
still hear like the finger picking on the on the strings, but then it goes to the end of the song where you can still hear the droning and it's back to the synth. So okay, it's
Yeah.
almost like a magical transition to something more lively in the dead center. Then I
Yeah.
love that so much.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. I think you nailed the terminology in that it's almost like this magic trick that they're able to play within the music. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Truly is.
Oh boy. Well, I'm so stoked and so happy that you connected with this, and that you found out about it. So I'm glad. I always I know I wasn't necessarily running a risk this time around, but every
Mhm.
time I give a new album to somebody, I'm like, oh well, I don't know if they're going to really enjoy it, or I don't know if they're really going to connect with it.
Yeah.
But I'm always stoked whenever it happens. So
Mhm.
I'm doing a little happy dance for you.
I'm glad. Yes.
And speaking of, we can transition into Disasterpeace,
Yes.
with the rise of Obsidian Interstellar.
Yes.
And so I've been playing a lot of A Link to the Past, because my Switch, I did the whole subscription thing on my
Yep.
Switch where I can now play like 100 or something like Super Nintendo games.
Yep.
And I was deprived as a child. I didn't have the Super Nintendo growing up.
Hmm.
I had the Sega Genesis, and I shouldn't say I was deprived. It was just a
Yeah.
different upbringing, right? So like
Hmm.
I was raised with Sonic the Hedgehog and Vector Man and all
Vector
those,
Man.
yeah,
Ooh.
all those tasty, like
Oh.
Subterranea was one of my favorite games growing up.
Yep.
And one of the main reasons for that was actually the soundtrack,
Yeah.
because the guy, like the composer of it, wrote these 7-minute suites because he didn't want to just loop the same like minute and a half over and over and over again.
Hmm.
So he composited like these 7-minute pieces because he figured, well, it's going to take about 7 minutes to get through these levels.
Hmm.
So that's kind of my starting point for this. And because I've been playing so much of Link to the Past, I've been listening to a lot of this, that what,
Chip.
16-bit
Yeah.
music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The chip tunes.
The chip tunes, yeah.
Those retro sound
The
cards.
retro sound stuff, yeah. And so I was primed for this. I was
Oh.
definitely primed for this. And especially when I had been listening to Leprous in order to get myself into this whole time and to talk about it, there's a
Yeah.
lot of overlay between these two, like the
Yeah.
use of different time signatures, the use of those really chunky bass sounds.
Hmm.
And this is one of the things I love about I used to call it bit music, but I guess they are now called, what did you call them?
Chip tunes.
Chip tunes.
It's a relatively widely accepted name for it, but I've also seen a lot of people reference it specifically as bit music too, because
Yeah,
that's correct. And
that's what
now
it
that
is. Yeah.
yeah, now that more bands have started to do emulated type sound of old sound chips and all that,
Mm-hmm.
of course, needs to make its own genre. Like
Yeah.
bands like Anamanaguchi and Slime Girls, they are I guess the forerunners of
Mm-hmm.
the live chiptunes audience or
Yeah. Yeah.
show. But yeah,
Yeah. And
having
so I was, as I mentioned, I was primed for this. I was stoked, and yeah, I loved the ebb and flow. Like you said, it was like very cinematic, and I could definitely
yes,
feel that. And I know that there is some kind of a narrative story going on here, because
yeah,
I did a little bit of research about it, about this whole storyline of these ragtag band of misfits that come together to kind of oversee this dastardly plan or something, or to overthrow it or something along those lines.
mm-hmm.
um, but the one thing that I leaning more towards the cinematic aspect of it, I love the ebb and flow.
Yeah,
Like I love that it's not at 11 the entire time. There's a
mm-hmm.
couple of moments that almost feel like a save screen,
Yes.
and I love that. I'm trying to remember the actual tracks. I want to say it was Enos, or I can never pronounce it.
and
Enis.
Ensis, that's the one
Ensis.
it's the song that starts after that really loud, like combusting, almost like
Yeah,
staticky
yeah,
sound that
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, the
that
beta
song is
brilliance.
yeah.
And I think that's part of it. I think because this track previous was so big and bombastic, we needed something just as a little bit of a rest your weary feet, young traveler kind of a track.
Right.
And I love, because those were always my favorite sounds, like the water level in Mario, even though it would
Oh.
drive me up the wall. Those were always my favorite in terms of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that here for sure. Yeah.
There's the in Ensis, I think it's pronounced Ensis. The we're talking about like odd time signatures as well.
Mm-hmm.
The bass line it starts off with very simple, but I mean the actual line, like it's like bow 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 or something like that along
Mm-hmm,
those lines. I'm
mm-hmm,
not sure if
mm-hmm.
it's exact, but it's such a weird like bouncy song because it goes from that like build up from okay you're resting, there's something big happening, oh it's a big open field of a journey, it sounds like a nice little stroll through some weird star field
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I again, as like just with that first track of Prologue, the moment that I started listening to that, I was just like, yeah, I chose well in terms of blending this with Leprous, because
Yeah,
of like the parallels between these two. Like
yeah,
it was ridiculous how close it sounded. Like all you needed to do was, instead of running this through the computer like generated music
yeah.
and just give it like actual instruments, this is what would be listened to. Like it was
Mhm.
crazy.
I've talked not talked but I guess I can say I've talked to myself so many times about like wow
Mhm.
how would this sound as a full band orchestration, and like with Prologue the beginning and how it has like that big slow build into to jump error uh from that crazy like thrush that
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and there's just points that I'm like I don't think it can be done live with some parts of it, but the more I foray into different like synth styles being played live, I'm like, okay, that makes sense there. I've recently gotten a lot into guitar pedals, and it's kind of been a big money, not a money pit, but a dent in my wallet.
a
And
money a money investment.
investment's the best word you could use. um, and I couldn't imagine how happy anyone would be to try to not even necessarily replicate the sound, but to match the same emotion that the
Mhm.
just the atmosphere it invokes from start to finish, because
Yeah.
Prologue pulls me in every time I hear it. It like piques my ears and I go huh,
Yeah.
okay, I know what I'm listening to, move the
Yeah,
fuck up.
yeah. And it's interesting because if somebody were to cover this, I'd almost, I don't know, it's like a dual process for me in terms of trying to match the sound in a guitar pedal. But
Mm-hmm.
I think what they should be doing first is matching the feeling, matching the
Big
essence
time.
of it, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you like translate a book to movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Yeah.
want to get the every single line of dialogue into the movie. What you want to do is get the actual like meaning behind it all.
Exactly.
And I think that's, I feel like that's where a lot of bands, I don't want to say fail, but miss the mark when they start touring with big orchestras or things like that, you know? Like
Yeah.
as much as I love like S&M from Metallica, or I'm trying to think of another big example, but I feel like they just use the orchestra to help pad, or I don't know, just fill out a song, when really they're not utilizing the talent and the potential there by like reworking the song to better fit the actual like essence of the track, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wholeheartedly agree. Especially when there's moments in those songs where it's like if you're trying to fill that space, you don't need to do it with a lot of sound.
Hmm.
Like we were talking about previously as well, with using almost like blank space as its own instrumentation
Yeah.
with the start of Congregation.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of points in here where, since there's a lot of not natural reverb on synths and different types of those sound chips, where it does throw a little bit of reverb in, it doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily make it sound like it's a long drawn out note. It's like it just happens and you hear the echoes of it. And I feel like that what's the song specifically? Maybe it's the New Formation. I might be thinking incorrect. That's track 5. I believe at some point around the middle of the album, there's a part that really stands out as of like, it's like really punchy, and it's like,
Hmm. Hmm.
not that it's a drawn out continuous like note being sung, but more like a punch of a note that's like, oh, I feel that, and I can feel it behind me after the punch left my body.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like the shockwave. It feels like the things, like it's the initial impact is there, but now we're experiencing all those shocks that have come about from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say, in terms of like switching gears just a hair, coming back to the narrative flow of this, even though you did send me kind of like the like
The bonus
unofficial
track. Yeah.
official bonus track, I
Yeah.
still feel like, is it submersible? Is that how you pronounce that?
Submersible. Yes.
Yeah, it was such a great
It's
ending
the
track.
I think it's the truest way to finish the
It
album as a
is. It
whole.
is.
Yeah.
It's not only like it does both things of culminating the album as a whole, kind of like how the Congregation did, but it was also kind of like that final music for the end credits.
Yes.
Um, and it really felt like, you know, when you finish a game and you're still in that high after finishing a game, and you're just letting it all bask over, and you're watching all the clip arts and the names scroll by, and it's just this beautiful music that's washing over. It's not
Mhm.
heavy, it's not intense, but it's very emotive. And I
Yes.
felt like that track on this album really, really did it. It really pulled it home.
Yeah, it's like the end of day when you sit down on your couch or lay in bed and you're like, wow, finally I can decompress from everything that happened today.
Yeah.
I'm really happy you used the analogy of how it's like an end credits scene of everything. You just beat the
Hmm.
game. Here's like flashbacks through everything that happened, and you're done. You've did it. You've won.
Yeah.
Almost in the sense that there's maybe an end credits scene with that bonus track on there, because
Yeah.
it touches base. It kind of goes back to where Prologue was. I think
Hmm.
it's a not a medley. It's like a reprisal of it, almost
Yeah.
very faint minute long reprisal of it, but uh, not necessary for the full album. It's a nice little touch, but
It is. It
Submersible
is. And it is
really.
kind of like, it is kind of that after credit scene where if it's a video game, it's that little bit of an after credit scene. And then you have that like continue or exit, right? Where you get to go back
Yes.
into the game and then continue whatever like side missions or things that you want to do, like explore the territory.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I felt like when I was listening to that additional track.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and this just helps spark my love that I already had for this style of music that I kind of left off the wayside. But I really do need to go back and revisit, because I have a pretty big library of this style of
Yeah.
music, but mainly on my computer. Like you
Yeah.
don't really get them in physical formats too often.
Hmm. No. I it's almost a shame that I feel like there's not many that do it like Disasterpeace does,
Hmm.
because it's like it's like a composition. It's like a score
Hmm.
for a movie, for a video game, and it's as much as you can get that type of stuff out of bands and out of people making full albums like this. A
Hmm.
lot of the time, it never really hits that score feeling while still being a listenable piece by piece track. It's not like I'm going
Yeah.
to listen to. Well, I was going to make a joke about how I'm not going to listen to Duel of the Fates by John Williams, but I have and will do
Oh
that
yeah.
again.
Oh, 100%. Like I still love, and I have multiple soundtracks and scores in my collection.
Yeah.
But I do feel like there is something to say about like like as much as I love those compositions, they still feel episodic because they're supposed to be.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
scoring moments in a film, there's scoring levels in a game, which misses a little bit of the mark in terms of sitting down and listening to a full length album.
Hmm.
And there's only maybe one or two of those style of albums that I can think of that do kind of have that narrative flow about it.
Yeah.
Like the ones that I can think of are maybe like the How to Train Your Dragon ones,
Ooh,
you know.
wow. My
It's
heart.
just, yeah, it's like that one. And I want to say, like unless you're listening to like nature documentaries, like I have the Blue Planet 2 on record,
Oh.
because it has that kind of same ebb and flow about it, but it still is a little bit on the episodic nature. The only
Yeah.
other one that I can think of that it blends well is like the Twin Peaks soundtrack, because
That's great. Yes. Great callback actually
yeah,
to Twin Peaks, because
yeah,
that is,
mainly
yeah.
mainly because like the show itself is very episodic and it is very dreamlike, and dreams have this whole like you're going from one moment to another moment, and it doesn't necessarily flow secularly or like non-secularly, or anyway,
I
word
get you.
salad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that sense, that episodic way of approaching it works, but in terms of this album, I love the fact that it feels very much not only just like a soundtrack to something, but it's telling you a story
Yeah.
through its music, even though there aren't any lyrics. um
Exactly.
yeah, so that was a great time. I loved it, and thank you so much
Yes.
for showing that to me.
Of course. Of course.
I'm
Uh,
100% going to have to dive in a little bit more, because it looks like there's another album that's getting quite a bit of attention called Hyperlight Drifter.
that is the soundtrack to the game Hyperlight Drifter. It is
That would be
a
it.
phenomenal game. The soundtrack to it, of course, is it's a fantastic soundtrack.
Hmm.
But generally, I would say I'm gonna pull up Disasterpeace on Spotify right now. So
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking through it. I know that that was the one that has like the most amount of listens per tracks outside
Yes,
of some of the tracks from It Follows.
yes,
Um,
I recommend fully 8 byte,
mhm.
8 byte and the Warring Nations. That is a another one that's a very big story front to back, or it feels like it is. It has a much rougher tone in the sense that it's not as big and clean as Rise of the Obsidian Interstellar is, but it has
Right.
more of that classic chip tunes, like 8-bit almost just meeting 16-bit, while
Right.
also having a very like interludes between a few tracks that have some like nature
Hmm.
sounds and like rain and birds and all that.
Oh, that
um
sounds good.
yes, I've been trying to listen to front and back the Disasterpeace catalog here, and it is a I mean, there's one, two,
There's a
three,
lot.
yeah.
There's a
um
lot.
Also, Disasters for Piano was a piano rendition of I think hits off of his whole catalog,
Hmm.
and the piano cover of Prologue is really nice. It doesn't do the
Hmm.
same justice as the start of Obsidian Interstellar, but it is
Right.
such a weird, nice little. That's how it plays out on
Yeah.
piano, at least.
Oh, that's great. I'm going to have fun diving into that. And I'm so glad that you were able to dive in and enjoy Leprous. And I just got to extend a huge thank you for coming on and sharing with me some great music and enjoying some great music. Is there anything you want to promote? Anything you want to leave the listeners with?
Sure. So I am not constantly. I am trying to stream more and more.
Mhm.
Every Monday I stream Pokemon. I am that's
Oh.
on twitch.tv/Shrycool, SHRYKOOL. Also,
Mhm.
I have socials dedicated to that specifically.
So
Um,
I gotta ask, which game are you going for? Because I started because the only systems I didn't have was the 3DS.
oh,
So I missed out on Sun and Moon and
X and Y.
X and Y. Yeah, those were the
Yes.
two that unfortunately I missed because of that.
Hmm.
But I'm recently replaying Black, and originally I was going to play that as a Nuzlocke.
Hmm.
But then once I got to the first gym, I'm like, nope.
So I just finished my first ever successful Nuzlocke
Oh,
on Monday, yesterday. It was Pokemon
congrats.
Emerald. Thank you very much. I
That's a
thought I
good
was
one.
gonna lose.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, But yes, I've been actually trying to run through each generation of games up until Sun and Moon.
Mm-hmm.
Sword and Shield, because newest games on the Switch.
Yep.
I have played Yellow. Did I think it was a Yellow randomizer that I did a random run of, and there was also regular Pokemon Yellow. Played that on stream. A Pokemon Crystal randomizer. I think I did a Nuzlocke of that, but I had a ridiculous team, so that wasn't a challenge.
Right.
I don't consider that too official since it's not a base game.
Yep.
Then my Emerald run was very scary at very, very frequent points, and I almost lost that. And I'm actually going to be skipping Gen 4 for now, which is Diamond and Pearl.
Yeah.
Since they have the remakes coming out.
They do.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that.
I'm very stoked. They left a really bad taste in my mouth when I played through them.
Interesting.
So I'm excited to jump back in with a fresher mind and appreciation for the whole series.
I will admit that's the only one that I haven't finished.
Yes, it's very slow, especially the original games. Having to trudge through all the snow in the I think around the 7th gym is a big pain. Defog was dumb, and the battle system's so slow. It takes, I think, 3 minutes. Weird fact. I think it's like around 3 minutes to one hit KO a level 100 Blissey with max IVs and EVs for HP. So it will just the health's almost there.
We're almost getting there.
A quarter.
We're almost there, guys.
And that type of stuff, I really hope they fix in the remakes. But until those come out in, I think, November or whenever they're coming out this year, I'm actually jumping into a ROM hack of Black and White. So there's games called Blaze Black and Volt White, which add all the Pokemon from the rest of the series in. Black and White are my favorite games in the entire series.
Okay.
So I'm relatively familiar with them already off the bat.
Yep.
But jumping into the ROM hacks are going to be a blast. I'm going to hopefully start that this upcoming Monday. If not, I might have something just to go in between. Besides the Monday streams for Pokemon, I, like we were saying at the very beginning, am part of a D&D or tabletop role-playing game streaming group. We recently not had to rebrand, but we changed the name up from Darkness and Dragons, where you can find all of that on Spotify, Apple Music, anywhere you find podcasts. It's now under D4 Adventures, whichever game we played. And currently I'm running Corrosion. We stream Wednesdays on twitch.tv/D4 Adventures. Same thing, socials, you can find that all over the place. It is a sci-fi adventure, a space opera of epic proportions, if you will. And besides that, I just randomly stream every other few days. And if anything pops up, then nothing too crazy.
Awesome. So yeah, go and follow Shrycool. Yes. I'll leave the name in the description so it'll be easier to find. And I think that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been another great adventure on Quid Prog Quo, and just keep sharing music, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.